This is the talk that's coming out of a lot of the Western mainstream media. Putin is unleashing a summer offensive to break Ukraine. His killing machine has been told to deliver a glorious victory at any cost. And here's a direct quote from that. It says, quote, the Ukrainian intelligence believe that Konstantinivka, I probably said that really wrong, and neighboring Pokrovsk will be the center of Russia's summer campaign. There are concerns about northeastern province of Sumy too, where Russia has massed 50,000 troops and is advancing towards the provincial capital in a mirror of Ukraine's own cross-border operation. Maybe we can get into the details of what actually is happening on the front line, because I think this is a big part of what's influencing the narrative war that we are hearing bandied about in the Western mainstream media right now.
That's one reason I never read The Economist anymore. What a pile of crap.
Well, I mean, glorious victory. It's not just a victory; it's a glorious victory.
A shill for the British government.
Yeah, but they had to start off with those three words. The Ukrainian intelligence believe. Gee, I wonder where they got that from.
Yeah.
MI6
wrote it for Ukrainian intelligence.
Yeah.
You know, people always made fun of me when I said I was a Marine intelligence officer. They went, well, that's sort of inherently contradictory terms there. But you know, when you put Ukrainian intelligence out there, it's like I have a damn PhD. You know, so no offense. I'm being mean now. It's very unprofessional of me. I'm trying to be professional because Colonel Wilkerson is here and he set a high bar with qui vive. So, I mean, in a way, The Economist isn't wrong when they describe the Russian killing machine. It is a killing machine. It's been finely tuned based upon the reality of the battlefield. Russia has brought this war under control, Russian control. And just imagine how difficult that is, you know, because Russia's fought several iterations of this conflict. Its initial engagement had a big political component to drive Ukraine to the negotiating table. That's a completely different kind of warfare. And it succeeded. They got Ukraine to the negotiating table within 6 days of initiating the special military operation. And within a month, they had successfully negotiated an agreement to terminate this conflict on terms favorable to Russia, but also favorable to Ukraine. It was I mean, if you compare and contrast the options Ukraine is facing today in Istanbul with the options they had back in 2022, man, they'd die to have those 2022 options available to them, but they missed that opportunity. But when Ukraine walked away, again, under pressure from the West, Russia transitioned to a second phase, which was basically to take control of Donetsk and Lugansk. To do this, they had to have the land bridge through Kherson and Zaporizhia, but Russia wasn't saying we're going to keep that. What Russia is saying is we're going to sustain this as part of our military campaign to achieve the liberation of Donetsk. And then afterwards, when we retrograde, when we have stable, we will pull back and this Ukrainian territory will be part of Ukraine. The proof in that is that Russia, in their negotiations with the Ukrainians, said we have no intention of holding on to this land. And as a good faith measure, they began to withdraw. They actively withdrew from around Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy. They were in the process of withdrawing in Kharkov. 50% of the Russian forces have been pulled back from the front lines in Kharkov as they were preparing to make a withdrawal back to the Lugansk borders. And that was exploited by Ukraine in the West with a $48 billion injection of military aid and assistance, the rebuilding of a Ukrainian military with Western training, and they carried out an offensive. But one of the reasons why the Ukrainians had great success is because the Russians weren't there. 50% of the troops were gone. They weren't prepared to fight a defense. They had to do a mobile withdrawal back to the lines that they were planning on falling back on. And then they brought in a new general, mobilized 300,000. They go into a different mode of fighting. And this mode was to transition to where the Russians can be dictating the outcome. Putin didn't want to have massive casualties. If you take a look at the Battle of Bakhmut, that wasn't the Ministry of Defense. That was a Wagner-driven operation, an anomaly in Russian military thinking, and it resulted in horrific casualties for the Russians in their victory. But that's not the Ministry of Defense's mode of fighting. They want to have a situation where they have more control over the tactical battlefield, where they are imposing their will. They are inflicting heavier casualties on the Ukrainians than they are receiving. But in order to get to that point, they had to absorb the attack of the Ukrainian army rebuilt by NATO. That was the summer 2023 counteroffensive, which Russia dealt with magnificently. But now Russia is transitions over to its state where it is today. This requires getting the Ukrainians whittled down to limit their options. You can't allow Ukraine the opportunity to rebuild these massive reserves and pour them in as they want, because that creates an ebb and flow. For the Russians to win, they need to be in control consistently moving in. And so you do this by shaping the battlefield reality so that the Russian tactics, the Russian weapons, the Russian operational procedures produce a predictable outcome every time they apply it. And so the Russians have come up with about a way of fighting war. Their infantry tactics have been totally redone. I spoke to Abdialadanov, who is a Chechen lieutenant general. He's in the Russian military. So he's a Russian general, but he's of Chechen origin, a noted combat officer. Because as a Marine, I think in terms of, fire team rushes, squads, operating support platoons, operating company operation, battalion, etc. The Russians have basically broken this war down in what we call 3s and 6s. And 3s is the size of your initial assault team. It goes in, it seizes a very defined piece of terrain, and then it's reinforced by the 6s, and they dig in until they stabilize, and they do it again. 3s and 6s. You don't want to go more than 3 in the assault team because of drone warfare. You present a target, the drones hit, boom. But they go into 3s because now they can support it with fire support, drone support, overlay drone support, and they can evacuate wounded if necessary. It's a very contained kind of warfare. Notice when I'm saying 3s and 6s, I'm not talking about big arrows punching through lines and maneuvering. I'm talking about very controlled, bite-sized operations taking place simultaneously across the battlefield. 3s and 6s all over the place. The Ukrainians responded to 3s and 6s by, again, this was a British concept, to throw drone swarms in. And drone swarms replaced the lack of artillery firepower. So the Ukrainians would hit them with drones. And you saw this in Pokrovsk and in other areas. When the Russians hit the drone storm, it came to an end. The Russian offense stopped cold. Now, what the Russians did is just simply divert over and outflank and eventually cause them withdraw. But what the Russians have come up with now, and you've heard this in talks with, for instance, the Azov Brigade, which is now the 3rd Assault Brigade, which is part of a larger corps of neo-Nazi Banderist loyalists. But these are very capable troops, very ferociously loyal to the regime. And they are complaining because they said, we used to be able to stop them with drones. But what the Russians have done now is that they are targeting our drone operators. They come in, and the second we start moving drones in, they hit us. They're killing. The most dangerous job in Ukraine today is a drone operator. You get killed the moment you go up. They say our drone operators have to withdraw. We lose the drone coverage. The Russians come in, and they push us back, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. Nothing. That's where we are on the battlefield right now, where Russia is dictating total control of the pace of operations. Is going to be slow, methodical. The kill ratios now in certain areas are 20-1, 20 Ukrainians to 1 Russian. And this is in a situation where the 3s and 6s are taking on a defensive position held by 11 to 15 Ukrainians. So you're sitting there going, well, wait a minute, in classic terminology, if I'm attacking 15 Ukrainians, I need a minimum of 45 of my guys, 3-1, maneuver and all that. That's not how it works, because the Russians dominate it, come in with their drones, suppress, and then they come in a carefully directed assault, and they kill all these people or capture them. And it's repeated over and over and over and over again. That's the reality of this battlefield. And this is not understood by all the idiots that are out there, singing I'm never going to denigrate the courage of the Ukrainian soldier. You know who else doesn't denigrate the courage of the Ukrainian soldier? The Russian soldier. The Russian soldiers say again, talking to Opti, who's no slouch when it comes to fighting. He's a lieutenant general. The man still, when he had some of his soldiers get wounded and the evacuation couldn't go get them, He left his command post, got in a BMP, and personally led the evacuation. Arrived there, he's laying down suppressive fire. His guy with him gets hit. He dresses that wound, evacuates that man, gets his guy out there. This is, at that time, he was a major general, doing a sergeant's job, just because that's how Russian officers are. They lead from the front. They're very brave. They often die. Hopefully Opti won't die, and he continued to do what he does. But, you know, when you talk to Opti, and you get a feel for that the Russians are dominating this war intellectually, militarily. They design tactics based upon the reality, and their ability to adapt is amazing. As something happens on the battlefield, they take it back to the rear area, refine it. They take an officer off to the General Staff Academy who sits there, and they bring together, you know, Colonel, you saw this in at SAM, School of Advanced Military Studies, where they bring the majors, lieutenant colonels together and they brainstorm. But the SAMs, you know, it could take 6 months, a year and a half for something to come out of SAMs. The Russians, they go up there within a couple of weeks, they got it back down there, modified, sent to the front line, retrained the guys, and go. The ability of the Russian army to adapt to the realities of this is unreal, and it's something the West just doesn't. We don't understand what's happening on the battlefield right now. We don't understand it at all. We don't understand the extent to which drones are dominating this war, and we don't understand how fire support has changed, how infantry tactics have changed, how air support has changed. And I'll just leave with this. Another thing that people aren't picking up on, if I ever do write a book about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, I think I'm going to focus on the suppression of air defense, the Russian campaign to take out the integrated air defense of Ukraine, because it's been one of the most remarkable, underreported campaigns out there, because it's not a Ukrainian integrated air defense. It's a NATO integrated air defense. This is the best that NATO could do, and Russia cracked it like a rotten walnut. And I can guarantee you that if Russia could crack that, first of all, understand this, that the NATO air defense that was layered over into Ukraine is not doctrinal. Why? Because NATO never planned on having that concentration of air defense. They were never like, you know, this much has to be put in there. They had to rewrite their doctrine to get air defense compressed like this. And the Russians beat them, whipped them, destroyed them.
Well, let me just throw something into that, because it's so pertinent. We're getting ready, Danny, to spend $2 to $3 trillion on legacy systems that experience utterly defies and refutes.
You're talking about Golden Dome.
Well, I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about the bomber, the manned bomber. I'm talking about two manned fighters. It's absurd.
You know, one thing also about cracking these air defenses too. I mean, in one day alone, Kiev was hit with 315 drone strikes and 7 missile strikes on a random day in Kiev. And out of that, I think one civilian perhaps was killed. One, maybe. I mean, it was spread out across a few places. There were about 3 spread out across a few places. So wherever you want to react to what Scott said, as well as this development, because I think it does show not only just how much Russia has cracked these air defenses, but how precisely they've cracked them.
You know, the only thing I would add to it, I can't add much to what Scott said, but I would add, in addition to how stupid we are in terms of the money we're going to spend, and even in Hegseth's new initiative to go out to Anduril and Palantir and others, it's the same stupidity, because they're looking at the same kind of legacy systems, just with new technology, which is nuts. But the other thing I would say too is that what this probably means ultimately, as we were saying before at the ether level, is that we need to get this thing stopped, and we need to get it stopped through the President of the United States, no matter how incompetent he might be to that stoppage. We don't need any more of this. We're gonna let it get out of hand, and it reminds me too much of what we're doing in the Levant, in Gaza, what happened this morning with the conversation that supposedly happened between Trump and Netanyahu, where Netanyahu guaranteed him that he was willing to accept 3.67% enrichment by the Iranians, and that he wouldn't attack. This is all nonsense in my view. That's all propaganda from Netanyahu. I don't even know if it's a legitimate description of the phone call. But we're really waltzing around some very dangerous situations in the world right now. And we need to get at least one of them shut down, if not all of them shut down simultaneously. Otherwise, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. And at the same time, as I was trying to indicate with the money we're going to spend on these idiotic schemes, which just reward the military industrial contractors, we are bankrupt. We are bankrupt, and we just won't admit it to ourselves.
Well, one of the things I'll say about the air defense issue, and that is, I personally, I had my suspicions about the state of air defense, NATO state of air defense, and worldwide about the direction it was going. I recall some years ago at Fox, I was talking to some guy that was there to talk about, missile defense, and he was the head of like the U.S. Physicist Society or something. And he made it very simple. He just said, Garland, it's very, very simple. We just throw up so many missiles that you can't shoot them down. We just put a bunch of dummies. We fire. I don't care what you got for some Golden Dome back then. It was missile defense. If I fire 1,000 missiles, 2,000, 3,000, 80% of them are dummies. You're not going to be able to stop it. That's the bottom line. Well, what we saw where I think the world learned a lot was the Iranian missile attack wasn't really an attack, a demonstration, shall we say, on Israel, where they just threw so many missiles and dummies and drones and all that stuff up that they overwhelmed an air defense. And that's where we are. And I think the U.S. isn't acknowledging that reality. As we say, you better do this, Iran, or else. Well, the reality is there is no or else, because if we say we're going to attack Iran, we have no guarantee that their air defense system, which is fairly elaborate, and it seems to have been beefed up by the Russians, may very well be able to repel an attack that we undertake against them anyway. Secondly, if they want to hit us, all they got to do is overwhelm all of our systems all throughout the region, and they can easily be defeated. So we're still pretending that we have this air superiority, pretending that we can attack Iran, pretending that we can stand up in the Pacific region, that we can actually fight China on their borders when we can't, when we've just been shamed by Yemen. So our government is living in this false military paradigm where we still have the capability to launch attacks against even, I wouldn't call them peer opponents, but fairly strong opponents, even weak opponents. We can't attack anybody. We don't need to get in a fight with anyone. And the only thing we're going to do is, if we start punching against someone out here who has drones and missiles, is get ourselves humiliated once and for all. And hopefully it doesn't go really, really bad, because of course, our leaders are probably to some extent nuclear prone. And as soon as we punch somebody and they smack the daylights out of us, they're going to start screaming, let's send nukes. And that then, regardless of what happens, that ends the U.S. empire. That ends the U.S. as the project that it once was. So it's a very dangerous situation, but there is a reality that our leaders will not accept when it comes to how air defense has changed the military paradigm worldwide.
I was just going to say, that's my greatest fear, is that we're going to get into something conventional. We're going to lose so badly. Think 3 carriers on the bottom of the ocean, that we're going to go nuclear.
Well, Scott, I think this is a good time then to talk about this U.S.-Russia Citizen Summit that you are helping organize. I can pull it up. The link is in the video description if you want to talk about this, because I know a big part of your efforts to build a U.S.-Russia understanding is to prevent this exact scenario.
First of all, I have to say this is, as Colonel Wilkerson knows, you don't win struggles through battles. You have to have a campaign. The campaign has to be linked to strategic objectives. And we've outlined some pretty difficult problems here. To me, one of the greatest problems that we face when it comes to U.S.-Russian relations is the expiration of New START treaty in February, the lunacy of Golden Dome, and the instability that those two things will bring together. But how do you get to that as a citizen? Because otherwise we just allow ourselves to be taken hostage by policymakers who don't give a damn what we think, and oftentimes formulate policy in a vacuum of politically driven stupidity, such as Golden Dome. I mean, it won't work, it can't work, but we're going to spend billions proving that point. But how do you get the citizens engaged? Because it's important that the citizens engage. I do believe when we speak of American democracy in the bottom-up approach, meaning that we, the people, have a voice and we can make this voice resonate, and that voice can achieve change if it's focused properly. Right now in the United States, the average American is infected. They didn't mean to be, but they have been infected just because of the way our society is structured with Russophobia. I mean, just think about it for a second. All the Hollywood movies that you watch, how are the Russians presented? As intelligent, wonderful people, cultured, or, you know, some guy with a fur hat and, you know, beer. I am a Russian. I drink vodka. I wrestle bears. I am very, very bad man. And, you know, we view them as dangerous. And the Russian women, of course, have wonderful accents, very beautiful, but they're trying to, you know, to put a knife in our back. This is how we've been conditioned, so that we fear Russia. We have an inherent fear for Russia. And from that fear, our government exploits us, and they put out policies that address this fear. That fear is derived from ignorance. I have found that one of the best tools for overcoming ignorance is direct dialogue. If I have a problem with my neighbor, rather than me sitting here going on social media and posting that problem and him responding or her responding, hypothetically, I don't do this, but I'm just saying, the best way to overcome that problem is to go have a conversation face to face. Hey, this is me. This is you. How you doing? Let's have a beer. Let's have a Diet Coke. Let's talk this thing out. We learn about each other, and misconceptions, misperceptions we had disappears. We realize we have a lot more in common than we have not in common. I think that's what we need to do with the Russian people. In 1985, Phil Donahue, the great Phil Donahue, great and late Phil Donahue, together with a man named Vladimir Posner, put together something they called the Space Bridge. They called it Space Bridge because the connectivity was through satellite telephones, a new technology back then. And it was a citizen summit, a Russian-U.S. citizen summit. And it allowed American citizens sitting in Seattle, Washington, to communicate with Russian civilians sitting in St. Petersburg. And they asked each other questions. They had a dialogue, and they began to realize that they're the same people. They're human beings, that they care about the same things. They laugh at the same jokes. They cry at the same, emotional triggers. They care. They want to live. And this initial space bridge then triggered others that helped create the environment that led to the lowering of the Iron Curtain and the normalizing of relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, and then later Russia. Now, our politicians fumbled this opportunity, and today we're faced with a new Cold War looming. And do we trust the dialogue that's taking place between our government and the Russians? And I say no. The American people, our job isn't to trust the government at all. Our job is to hold the government accountable for what it does in our name. I think we need to set an example. And through the setting of this example, we need to also educate the American people not to be afraid of the Russians. And how do you do that? By exposing them to the reality of Russia. And so we're going to do, on the 40th anniversary of the original Space Bridge, we're going to do a Space Bridge, a new U.S.-Russian Citizens Summit. We're going to link 50 Americans with 50 Russians, and we're going to have a dialogue over the course of 3 hours. And it's going to be streamed live, and it's going to be recorded and available. And we hope to use that as a teaching mechanism for other Americans to say, hey, we want to engage with these Russians. They maybe repeat this exercise over and over again. And in the process, inoculate ourselves against Russophobia so that we're not afraid of the Russians. So when the government comes down and says, you must approve $175 billion to defend against the Russian threat, we go, well, wait a minute. Is there really a Russian threat? What if we just talk to them? It's cheaper and it produces better outcomes. And so that's what we're trying to do here. Some people might call me naive, and you know what? It may be naive. But But I also view it as the beginning of a process, a campaign that will, because if I can get the American people to accept the premise that we can live in peace with the Russians, then I could get them to accept the premise that we don't need Star Wars, we don't need Golden Dome, we don't need new missiles, that we need to engage in arms control related dialogue. When was the last time you heard anybody talk about arms control in the Trump administration anywhere? It's just not part of the national lexicon. It used to be everything. Back when I was a young buck, that's what I cut my teeth on. I didn't mean to. I joined the Marine Corps to close with and destroy, but next thing I know, they got me in the middle of the Soviet Union, engaged in arms control verification. And I fell in love with it because it was good. It brought about a nice result. It's made the world a safer place. And I became a believer in these arms control treaty vehicles. We're out to watch the last remaining one expire, and there's nothing to replace it. The treaty that I implemented that I believe saved the world from destruction, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, is no more. And the weapon systems that we once got rid of are now threatening to come back and bring the world close to, the kind of danger that prompted us to get rid of them to begin with. But the campaign can only be waged if you have a solid foundation upon which to build the campaign. And I believe that we need a foundation of support from the American people that's predicated on a willingness to engage with the Russians responsibly, people to people. And that's what this Citizens Summit is all about. It'll be on June 18th in Kingston, New York. It's a ticketed event because we don't have the budgets. We tried to go to New York City and look at getting a theater that could hold a couple hundred people. And I think the low end budget was $120,000. And I went, yeah, that's like orders of magnitude above my budget right now. So we downsized, but it doesn't mean it's a lack of quality. The event is held at Gerald Salante's wonderful Mohican Market. We've converted it into what we call the American Cafe. So when the Russians look in, they're going to see a slice of Americana. This isn't going to be Hollywood. Thank God. I think LA's under fire right now. It's not going to be New York City, too expensive. It's going to be America, and we're going to be staffing it with Americans, the average working class Americans from all walks of life. And that's what the Russians are going to see, the good, the bad, whatever. It's going to be the real America. And I hope we get to see the real Russia, and we get to, drop all pretense. This is who we are. This is what we're about. And have a meaningful dialogue. It's a wonderful opportunity. And thankfully Garland, you've spoken about this in the past, and Danny, we've talked about it, and Larry, we've done the same thing. I apologize, sir, Colonel Wilkerson. Who am I to call Colonel Wilkerson? No, I know. I let my guard down. my former mentor is looking up at him, going, God, I can't say what he's going to say, but Ritter, don't you ever get familiar with a colonel again. But it's just in my training. But the point is, we're talking about the importance of alternative media. This isn't going to be covered by mainstream media. They would never touch this. In fact, the Russians initially tried. I mean, it's amazing. They reached out to all the mainstream media, and they either got a stead, no way are we going to do this, or just no response. So they were concerned about this alternative media approach. But what I tried to tell them is that we have this family of podcast idea. I mean, last year we could do events that would end up getting 3 to 5 million views, and the potential for even more. That's outperforming much of the mainstream media alternatives out there. So even though this is a smaller venue, I think we're going to crack into the American audience. I think we're going to get a good audience. I think we have the chance of succeeding. And so I'm excited about this opportunity. And I have some friends that I communicate with who are very interested in this conflict, who are depressed right now, because how could you not be depressed after listening to some of the stuff that we were throwing out there earlier? This is a very dangerous situation. And there's so many people that listen to this harsh reality we put out there that just get overwhelmed with depression and say, it's just hopeless. It's hopeless. And so the Citizens Summit also injects, I think, a positive vibe to bring some hope that there is a potential pathway out of there. And I like to wake up in the morning and not just say I'm here to confront problems, but I'm here to solve problems. And I think the Citizens Summit is one part of a solution to the complex problems we face today. But thanks for allowing me to talk about it, Danny. I really appreciate it.
Everyone can find the link to the U.S. Citizen Summit in the video description below after the show. And you can also find Scott is now on YouTube again, so you can find his YouTube channel too.
Today was the first post. We'll see how long YouTube allows me to stay up. But I'll just can I make one last pitch?
Okay, sure.
As I said, the New York City video is $120,000. We couldn't afford it. We initiated something based upon the budget that we had. I can already tell you that the actual expenses are going to be 2 or 3 times greater than the initial thing. Now, I'm not talking 6 digits, but I am talking, a couple $1,000s that we need to raise. We're not charging any money for people to come to this thing, but there's a donation button in this thing, and if people can see fit to donate, it would be greatly appreciated. It doesn't go into my pocket. What I can guarantee is that if I don't get the donations, it comes out of my pocket because I have personally committed to making this succeed. And if you want Scott Ritter to be married to Mrs. Ritter for a significant period of time, help me save my marriage, because I have committed myself to something that financially, anyways, if you believe in peace, you want to make this work, and you want to save my marriage, donate.